Thank you so much for having me here today. It's such an honor to be with all of you. And we're all doing the best we can, right? As we're coming through the end of this pandemic and really challenging year. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my slides. And Brittany, feel free to pop in with great relevant questions that are kind of on the topic, and we'll just kind of keep things moving as we go. So as Brittany mentioned, I own a practice here in Chicago called the Chicago Center for Cognitive Wellness. We are a private practice that specializes in providing mental health services to people who have been affected by a cognitive change in some way. And so about maybe 25% of our clients are people who are maybe experiencing the early stages of a dementia. And then the next most prevalent brain clinical group within our clinic are people who have experienced a brain injury in some way. And so it's been a real passion of mine to work with people who have experienced the whole range of brain injuries. We tend to work mostly with people who have more of the kind of silent injury where maybe they've kind of regained the ability to walk and talk, and then we're needing to work on more of the cognitive and emotional impact of that. And so we help with restoring compensatory strategies to kind of work around any changes in memory, attention, executive function. And we also have some restorative interventions to where people can maybe expand their working memory modestly, that it's modest, but it's also very impactful and can help people kind of get back to work, perhaps if that's one of their goals, but also just to kind of, develop and achieve other life goals for feeling more self-efficacy, becoming more independent, and really just kind of feeling better about themselves and their lives. And so in addition to the cognitive interventions, we do a lot of mental health interventions. And so it's really inspiring to hear Carol's story, and again, because that's a lot of kind of what we do day to day. And as Brittany mentioned, I do have a book coming out. You can pre-order it now. You won't get it until July, but that's getting very, very close. So I am going to go ahead and just put in the chat the link to where you can purchase that on Amazon if you're so inclined. So it is called The Neuroscience of Memory, 7 Skills to Optimize Your Brain Power, Improve Memory, and Stay Sharp at Any Age. It's a self-help workbook that's really geared toward a very broad audience, but I include in the people, like who is this book for part, people who have been affected by brain injury. And so it may be something that you're interested in looking into. It's got kind of 2 elements to it. So there are the 7 strategies are some lifestyle strategies that I'm actually going to share with you today. But throughout the book are memorization strategies so I have kind of included evidence-based strategies that we teach people to help them learn better and be able to kind of form memories in a more effective way. So and you get to practice that kind of throughout the book as you also learn the neuroscience behind it all. So there are some sections that are a little dense on the science, but I think you can handle it. But then kind of mixed in there are tools for you to be able to kind of integrate that information and sort of use it for yourself. So, okay. All right. So as the title mentioned, like, let's talk about feelings, right? We've been through a whopper of a year and a quarter almost, right? It's been a lot. Think back, I was just recently sitting around thinking about kind of what things sort of felt like last March, April, May. And, we've been through a lot. I mean, at the beginning, and throughout this whole year, we've been faced with a lot of illness. And this very mysterious, invisible virus that's kind of lurking around every corner. And, is it real? Is it not? It's infecting people. How do you get it? How do you not get it? What do you do? Unfortunately, well over 500,000 Americans have died from this virus. And so there's just been tremendous loss and tremendous fear. And not just fear from a loss of life, but also an enormous economic toll that this virus has affected so many of our different communities. We've had unprecedented job loss. We've had some recovery, but there's still a long way to go. And a lot of people who are sitting around wondering, how am I going to cover these bills? These particularly medical bills. I remember watching on the news some programs about families who had been hospitalized for COVID, some families had like between two family members, about $1.5 million in medical bills. So there's the economic toll related to not working and needing to stay home, having to get your groceries delivered, extra cost, and also just related to medical expenses. Things have been kind of spooky out there and scary. And, while some of us may have ventured back into grocery stores, but just the mundane things that we used to do on a daily basis have really changed. Things as simple as going to the grocery store, going to the library, have been just really, really different. There's been, unfortunately, a lot of debate about whether or not to wear masks. But even just being around people who are masked is a little threatening to us. We're social primates. One of the ways that we really kind of survive in this dangerous world is really by kind of banding together. Because if you think about it, we're kind of weaklings in this world, right? We don't run that fast. Our teeth aren't that sharp anymore. We don't have big claws. How our ancestors kind of made it through the wilderness to make it to where we are now is by forming tribes, sticking together. And so there's very little that's more threatening to a social primate than any facial indication that you might be getting kicked out of the tribe or something like that, right? So we really rely on kind of reading other people's faces. A lot of us have gotten used to, the mask. And so then the other part of it, like now that things are starting to open up a little bit, vaccines are becoming more prevalent. I personally just started getting into new situations where I'm around people who aren't masked. That has its own set of challenges and fears. But we've kind of adjusted to a lot of this, right? We've learned how to smile with our eyes and connect. But there's a lot. And COVID is not the only thing that we've been through this year, right? Like we've been through a major reckoning on race relations in the United States. I think is it today that is the 1-year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. We've been through the trial, the conviction. So much has happened. We've also had some major political upheaval in ways that our country really hasn't been through before. And, through all of this, we've been lonely, we've been disconnected, we've been not having our normal outlets for stress reduction, which, for our social primates, a big part of our physiology is that we manage our stress response by being around other humans. And a big emotional need for us, which is really a biological need, is the need to connect, to be seen and to be heard and to be understood. And so we know that a lot of people have been experiencing a lot of loneliness. There have been a lot of associated deaths related to that. We know that loneliness is a major health risk. In terms of the number of years that it can take off of your life, some estimates are on par with smoking. And so it's been hard. We haven't been able to kind of have the same kind of freedom to go out and play and connect with our friends and families. And then if you're a parent, right, you've had kids at home. I'm a mother of 4, and there's an upside to this, that I get a lot of extra cuddles that I didn't used to get, but my kids recently started going back to school, and I started describing it to some people where it's like, you know what, the last year has kind of been, there are these experiments that they do to measure stress in research animals, and one of the types of experiments that they do for rats or mice is that they'll actually take the floor of their cage. It just doesn't sound very nice, but they'll take the floor of their cage and turn it into a metal plate that has a small amount of electrical current kind of coming through it. It's not enough to shock them or hurt them, but it's just sort of this vibration that just kind of feeds through their nervous system. That's what my house has felt like over the last year, which is kind of this constant busyness of having kids around all of the time. A lot of us have been trying to work at home with kind of extra distractions and interruptions. And if you've had any sort of cognitive changes related to brain injury, then that we know how much that just sort of makes everything harder. And so all of us struggle with the ability to kind of maintain our focus, limit distractions, limit interruptions. But when you don't have the same level of executive function or attention focus that you used to have, that's exponentially harder, right? And all of this just creates a lot of stress. Again, if you're a parent, you taking on a role that you're not used to. I didn't sign up to be a teacher. That was not what I kind of went into this whole parenting thing for, making sure my kids are logged into class. And so it's been a lot. And unfortunately, all of this stress has led to a lot of conflict within families. We've seen divorce rates increase. We've seen alcohol use increase significantly. Opiate deaths in Illinois are up by 30% over last year. And the impact on families and abuse is something that we need to make sure we don't turn a blind eye to. So I did want to go ahead and just pop in a couple of resource numbers for reporting domestic violence, suicide, adult protective services in Arizona, and then also child abuse, because it's been hard to be good neighbors because we've been trying to be distant, but we need to work together and really protect one another through this really most challenging time. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, and I do want to mention suicide for a minute, because people who have experienced brain injuries are at remarkably higher risk for suicide compared to the general population. The risk for suicide among traumatic brain injury survivors is about 15%. Compare that to less than 1% of people who, to less than 1% of the general population that goes on to commit suicide. Also, you might be a little surprised as to what demographics tend to be most successful at committing suicide, and it's actually older white men who commit suicide the most frequently. So some other, like women, may have more suicide attempts, but men tend to pick methods that are more lethal and more effective, and so they have the highest rate, and that may surprise you a little bit. So let's talk about more things that we've been afraid of. What about 30% of Americans are just afraid of needles, and now we have these vaccines that were produced very rapidly. The technology turns out to not actually be that new. This is something that vaccine makers have been researching for decades, it sounds like, and we're able to kind of have sort of the base information and then just kind of load in the right kind of genetic information for this particular virus. Turns out that they're remarkably effective. Yet, a lot of people are afraid to get the shot. A lot of people are afraid of having the conversation with people. They're like, have you had the shot? Have you not? What is that about? Now we're starting to have to delve into a lot of new social interactions that are new, right? Like we've been through a lot already with, staying at home and, maybe choosing to go to a family gathering or not. What do we do with invitations? Now there's a whole new piece of this. It's sort of opening up that we're asking each other, kind of personal questions and then having to set new boundaries. We're also faced with this new situation of, well, when do the masks come off, right? And, what situations do I feel comfortable in? Do I not? I mean, generally now the CDC has let us know that if you're fully vaccinated, that it's safe for you to be indoors without a mask. That's amazing. That's wonderful. At the same time, again, as a mother of 4 young daughters, children under the age of 12 can't get a vaccine. So my 4 daughters aren't vaccinated because they can't be vaccinated. And so now I have a whole new decision-making level to kind of what, are we going to stop taking them to the grocery store? Because I don't know. I mean, if Illinois still has a mask mandate and, but if that goes away, then my decision-making is going to change. And then, it's wonderful and so joyful that we're able to now connect with people in ways that we weren't before. And so joy is a feeling we're going to talk about, which is fantastic. And there are other elements to this. There may be a little bit of fear. This may be something that you're maybe not ready for, or that you're not sure how to navigate. Or if you choose not to lean in for a hug, how does that go? And what's going to happen to the relationship? The other piece of this, and then when I pulled this image up today, that really I felt pretty emotional kind of looking at this. And I don't know if you've started to notice this yet or not, but as we start to move into maybe some new normal types of things that used to be normal and engaging in those interactions, that some of the grief that may have been sitting dormant starts to kind of bubble up to the surface, so that we've gotten used to certain things. Now that they're coming back, we start to realize how much we've missed them. And so I felt really touched by this photo personally of just, how much we've missed all of this, and how nice it is and how much it's hurt, right? So it's so critically important that we honor our feelings, because I think a lot of, we're Americans, we're hardy. A lot of us tend to be rather stoic. And I grew up in a culture like that, where it wasn't really okay to have feelings, or certain feelings were okay and others were kind of not okay. What we know about feelings is that they're really important. And they really help us, and it's critical that we allow them their space in our lives, because when we don't honor our feelings, that can lead to a lot of negative impact on our bodies, on our behaviors, and even on our cognition. And so as people, who are interested in brain injury, and perhaps, many of you have experienced that, building up your repertoire of all the ways that you can work on improving your cognitive skills is important, and feelings are an important piece of that. And so when we have unexpressed feelings, that can get in the way of our thinking ability and our day-to-day function. So let's dig into a few of these feelings. So this talk kind of came together at the beginning of the pandemic, because I sat down and was just kind of doing a little bit of an inventory of all the things that I was feeling as this virus started to come in, and we started, figuring out how are we going to handle all of this, what's happening. And I noticed I felt a lot of fear, and my approach to fear as a psychologist is that it took a kind of a 180, because psychotherapists are trained to work with people to kind of look at their fears, and fear is important. Fear is very critical. It ensures our survival. In psychotherapy, a lot of the time what we're doing is looking at people's fears and saying, well, is this fear actually serving you, or is it something that's getting in the way? more often than not in a clinic like ours, the fear is something that's getting in the way. And we're kind of working with people to try to like face your fear and, like do something new and brave. When this invisible virus came along, we're like, yeah, all right. Some of those behaviors are things that we're actually going to encourage now, like, no, I don't know that it isn't, important that we try to like, get out of the house or do anything. So anyway, we kind of had to take a pivot in looking at fear and really talking about how it serves us. It's important. It keeps us alive. I mean, that's the basic function of fear. And our brains are wired for fear, because imagine if you didn't have fear. What would that be like, right? So you would probably make some choices that maybe weren't in your best interest, like walking off of cliffs or hanging out with lions. And so fear, like I said, is very important. And it's so important that any sensory input that kind of comes into your brain goes to this little fear detector down in the bottom part of your brain called the amygdala. You have two of them. There's one on each side. They're kind of right above your ears. And this little structure is constantly surveying the environment, looking for things that it thinks might kill you. And it may be things that will actually kill you, right? And a lot of times it's things that aren't going to kill you, like looking at your bank balance or calling your mother-in-law. But it doesn't know the difference, and it doesn't really care. And so what it's going to do, though, is to set off this whole fight or flight response in your body. And so a lot of times what we become afraid of is actually the fear response itself, right? Where our heart starts racing and pounding, and, you might feel sweaty, you might feel a little lightheaded or dizzy, you might feel like you need to throw up or go to the bathroom. But this is all just your body and your brain really just trying to keep you alive. And it's important. And I think that we really need to honor our fear, because again, it's kept us safe, right, throughout this last year, but just over the course of our entire lives. And there's kind of, with us humans, there's sort of these two pathways of fear, that we can have what we call like a bottom-up fear, which is sort of fear coming through your body, because our bodies are actually very perceptive. There's a type of perception we now call neuroception, which is that, the body and the brain are connected by this amazing, very large nerve called the vagus nerve. And 90% of the input, or 90% of the nerve pathways within the vagus nerve, are actually pathways that come from the body into the brain. And so there's a lot of body input that's kind of coming into the brain to say like, oh, this doesn't feel right, this feels scary, this doesn't feel safe. And so that's what we would consider kind of a bottom-up type of fear. That gut response is very much legit, something to really be paying attention to. And so getting into our bodies and understanding kind of what's going on, doing a gut check, is really important. Then there's a second type of fear that humans have that most other species don't have. We can generate our fear response purely with our thoughts. And so unfortunately, a lot of us can kind of stay in sort of an unhealthy state of fight or flight, because once we've sort of removed ourselves from whatever that legit fear situation is, we can continue to kind of ruminate, worry, and really kind of maintain that fear response that other species might not actually have. And so, I took the title off of this, that doesn't have, but anyway, this is a little graph that I made up to kind of explain. There's a book by a neuroscientist named Robert Sapolsky called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. And it's really kind of like why zebras don't get ulcers, and we do, right? And so zebras don't get ulcers because there's really just kind of two states of this nervous system that your body can either be in or not. And so these two states really can't be active at the same time. One is that fight or flight response that I just talked to you about. You've got that adrenaline kind of rushing through your body. The opposite of that is what you learn in med school as rest and digest. And it's an opportunity for your body to kind of go back to resting baseline, where blood flow kind of comes back to your vital organs. You digest your food in order to kind of store up energy. And so zebras don't get ulcers because they have this nice healthy balance between the fight or flight reaction and the rest and digest. They're hanging out, eating grass, everything's great. They see a lion, have that fight or flight response. They run, which is also important because then they can kind of complete that stress cycle. They might shake off their fear. And then out of sight, out of mind, they go back to eating grass, hanging out, no big deal. But humans, we have the ability to activate our fight or flight with our thoughts. And how do you think, like, what would we all do if we ran away from a lion? To just go back to eating grass and hanging out, right? No, I imagine a lot of us might be on the phone like, oh my God, I almost got eaten by a lion. Or what if it happens again, right? And kind of worrying and what ifing. And so fear is good. It keeps us alive and it can kind of get in our way. And so one of the things that we need to do for ourselves is to train ourselves to really kind of put ourselves back into rest and digest. Right? And you can do that in a whole variety of ways. You can do it directly through your body. You can, if you take a breath, let's all do that for a second. So just take a breath. If you slow down your breath, you can actually slow down your heart rate. You can lower your blood pressure. You can also put your body into rest and digest by releasing muscle tension. So doing body scans or other types of meditation practices like yoga nidra can be helpful for that. And we can also do this by completing the stress cycle. So one of the reasons zebras don't get ulcers is because they actually run off all of those stress hormones. And then there's an automatic rebound into the rest and digest. So there's lots of ways that we can kind of get there from a bottom up perspective. From a top down perspective, we can work on kind of, controlling worry, controlling rumination, telling ourselves we're safe now, everything's okay. I remember having that moment kind of early in the pandemic where I was sort of like sitting in my house and I'm like, kind of had this. And I was like, wait a minute, okay, I have to like go through this inventory. Like I'm inside, I've washed my hands. As far as I know, there's 0 virus inside this house. So I can chill out. This, but I had to like literally tell myself that. So that can be really helpful. Okay. Another thing that we've seen a lot of, unfortunately, is depression. And like I said, this talk came about because I wrote a blog post kind of early on in the pandemic, and I started thinking about, when we started physical distancing and sort of locking ourselves inside of our homes, this had all the ingredients of a depression cocktail, right? It's, 2-part social isolation, 1 part, not hanging out with your friends, a dash of fear, and, just kind of shake it all up, and it can feel really hard. We don't have those normal outlets that we typically have. Again, we're social primates. We get a lot of joy and a lot of our emotional needs met by connecting with other humans. So we've been pretty creative, right? We've started getting on Zoom conferences and Zoom everything. I've even learned how to do Zoom eye hugs. So you can just kind of, oh, hi, how are you? Right. And kind of just connecting in new ways. But it can be really, really tough. So it's really important that you find some places to express your feelings, connect with other people, get some help. Maybe you've never been on an antidepressant medication. But maybe this is the time where it needs to happen. They can be remarkably effective, and it doesn't have to last forever. Telehealth has really expanded psychotherapy interventions, which has been great. I heard at one point that 1 in 6 Americans were in psychotherapy for the first time in their life, which is profound, right? I mean, it's a testament to how hard this year has been. And it's also a testament to the fact that, there are a lot of people who aren't afraid to go and ask for help. So I would encourage you not to allow the stigma or whatever kind of maybe thoughts are kind of getting in the way of that. As of now, most insurance carriers are still covering telehealth. A lot are still even waiving cost sharing, so you may not have to cover a deductible or pay your copay. And also starting to advocate for maintaining a lot of that expanded coverage, because a lot of people have had access to mental health services at levels that they've never really had before. And if all of this gets rolled back, when the emergency orders go back, there are a lot of people who are going to have even more losses once this is all over. What Medicare is set to expire on telehealth coverage and go back to these kind of silly origination sites once the emergency orders are lifted. So I encourage you to do a little bit of political advocacy if this is something that you value and you want to maintain. Let's talk about grief. Oh, right. I mean, maybe you've lost a loved one to COVID or any of the other reasons that deaths have actually been on the rise over the last year, right? Like a lot of people prevented cancer treatment. A lot of people have died of heart attacks. We've seen a 16% increase in Alzheimer's related deaths during the pandemic. You know, just not having the same type of connection, activity, being out and about. There's been a lot. And it's not just death that we've been grieving, right? We've been grieving a whole host of things: normalcy, babysitters, seeing travel, you know, just sitting at a Starbucks and having a good chat with your buds. And it's okay to grieve even these little things, because grief doesn't kind of care what's socially appropriate, and grief doesn't care, you know, which grief is worse than the other. So I really just kind of encourage you to kind of let these, grief comes in waves. And I think a lot of times people are scared to sort of let that in, because you're like, oh, if I allow these feelings, then I'm never going to get out of it. And that's not actually true. You know, how you really get stuck is by trying to shove those feelings down. And so grief comes in waves, and sometimes it only lasts a few seconds. It might last a few minutes. It might last a couple of hours. You might need to go take a nap, like Carol said, you know, because it can maybe increase some fatigue or intensify things. So, but it's important to let those waves come, because we don't have any way of knowing how long that little wave is going to last. And we also don't have any way of knowing how long these waves are going to keep coming. My first experience with grief was, I don't know, about 15 years ago when my dog died. First time I lost a dog. And I was like, I'm going to give myself a good week of hard crying and then it'll be over. Right? And then like a month later, it was like, kept coming. And I'm like, what? I didn't understand this. It didn't make any sense to me. And so don't judge the grief. Don't judge it for the source. It could be as little as, you know, not having your favorite coffee drink, right? It can be little teeny tiny things. It can be huge, but so don't judge the source, and also don't judge the intensity or the duration. It's important to kind of let this go through. Also want to take a minute to talk about anger. Anger is really important. And, you know, we women, we're kind of sometimes not allowed to be angry. Sometimes that's what men are only allowed to do, is be angry, and they're not really allowed to have these other feelings. So there are some kind of gender biases for anger. But here's the thing, we all have it. It's normal. It's important. Anger serves a purpose because it allows us to protect ourselves. It's kind of like a guard dog, you know, like that's kind of, you know, in the yard, like keeping people out and kind of protecting everything. So it also orients us towards action. And so it allows us to do those things that we might be afraid of doing, like calling our congressperson or saying no to a certain family gathering, or, you know, something like that. But so it can also get in the way of connection, but I don't want us to kind of like squish it all down. I encourage you to really kind of sit with the anger. Let it flow through. You might need to do some workouts at the anger gym by, you know, maybe taking a dish challenge. Just no, you know, but be loud. Go somewhere you can be loud, like in your car. Just not in the garage with the engine on and the door closed, right? Like but or maybe like beating on the bed. Like these are things that can really kind of express and also allow that stress response to kind of complete itself, because it's very physical. And And the other thing, though, I do want to mention is that anger can also be a little addictive, right? And so sometimes I've noticed this about myself, just kind of getting a little addicted to certain moods, maybe like doom and gloom, despair, anger. One of my favorite pastimes over this pandemic, just because out of sheer exhaustion and not really much else to do, sitting down at the end of the day with like a bag of chips and watching the news, and just like, ah. So, I really had to, develop some awareness of that and just kind of start to limit some of those things. Maybe try something new, like now the weather's not getting nicer for you in Arizona. I recognize that this is kind of the hard time of the year, right? But here in Illinois, the weather's getting a little bit nicer, kind of getting out maybe for a walk, and maybe some distant interactions with friends. So, and finally, though, it's okay to feel joy too, right? And now we're starting to maybe get some extra doses of joy that we weren't getting before. But early in the pandemic, I remember talking to a couple of my clients and they were like, I kind of feel bad that I'm actually kind of excited about XYZ because everybody else is having such a hard time. Like, it's not okay for me to feel joy. Like, no, it's okay. It's okay to feel joy. We are, it doesn't mean that you're, uncompassionate if you're feeling some joy. And it's important to feel joy. And so it's important to try to figure out ways to kind of cultivate joy and expand that throughout this time together. Okay, so those are the feelings. We'd also promised you how to get the most out of your memory. And so we're going to pivot a little bit into some of the strategies that I recommend in the book. And I just want to peek on the time. Okay, so yeah. All right, so I'll go through this a little bit. Oh, we're doing okay, Kristen. All right. Okay, so in my book, The Neuroscience of Memory, I promise you 7 skills to optimize your brain power and improve memory and stay sharp at any age. And I'm going to go through those 7 skills so that it's not a mystery. You don't have to buy the book to get all the goodies today, right? So, okay, so number 1, you may not think of this as a brain health strategy. You're like, I'm going to improve my memory by moving my body? Yes. And so probably the number 1 best thing you can do for your brain is to move your body. I know it doesn't sound normal, but there is really great experimental evidence that shows that being physically active is probably the number 1 best thing you can do for your brain for a couple of reasons. For number 1, it's good for your heart, and what's good for your heart is good for your brain. Our brains need a constant supply of blood flow to stay alive, and any interruption in blood flow is devastating to our brain cells. But in addition to that, when you're physically active, you actually grow more brain cells. Did you know that? Did you know adults grow new brain cells? I don't know if you knew that. We do. We don't grow a lot of them, so you do need to keep the ones you have, okay? And they don't grow all over the brain. So if you've had, which many of you have had a brain injury, if certain cells have died as a result of that injury, it's unlikely that those cells are going to come back. The brain cells only grow in and around the hippocampus, which is like this little seahorse-shaped structure that's kind of right above your ears. It sits right behind the amygdala that I showed you earlier. It helps you form new memories. And these new baby brain cells only grow in and around that structure, that one really small part of your brain. But growing those new brain cells is helpful, and it seems to have a direct impact on helping you form better memories. So if you want to learn and remember better, move your body. In addition to growing new brain cells, the brain cells you've had all of your life are known to reshape and remold themselves easier when you're physically active. When we move our bodies, we produce these chemicals called nerve growth factors. They're sort of like Miracle-Gro for your brain cells. And so they allow the brain cells that you've had your whole life to form new connections and really kind of plump up those connections. And that can play a big role in your brain injury recovery, because, you know, if some of you have recovered certain skills, in some cases, it may be that those brain cells weren't actually dead, that they were just kind of knocked offline for a little bit and then they came back. But in a lot of cases, you may get a skill back because neighboring brain cells have kind of formed new branches to go out and make these new connections that allow you to kind of have that skill back, right? Regaining function of your arm. It's not because those cells on your motor cortex that were related to moving your arm, it's not that those cells came back, it's that their neighbors kind of branched out and took on new jobs. And you can help facilitate all of this by moving your body. We also have good experimental evidence that when you move your body, you remember things better. And so that's my number one best thing to do. Number two is to learn something new. And I don't think you necessarily have to sign up for an online brain fitness program unless you've kind of got all your bases covered, right? And I wouldn't do this at the expense of moving your body or anything else on this list. And you can really improve your brain by learning just about anything. Being in a book club, making new friends, exploring new parts of history, even learning, like my kids are into Roblox, like learning some other different video games, but also just being social is a big source of learning new things. I have this as a number two because it is very important, and it also tells kind of a nice story as sort of like a step two after moving your body. Because remember those baby brain cells that you popped out when you were going for your walk? Those don't actually start off as new brain cells. They start off as stem cells. In order to grow up to be a new functioning neuron, they have to be stimulated by neighboring cells, which means you need to fire up the memory centers in your brain. So coming to a program like this and kind of learning new things really helps those baby brain cells grow up to become new neurons. If they're not stimulated, they actually get just reabsorbed by the system, which is just a nice way of saying that they die. So to keep them around, you got to give them a job. It's sort of like college for these baby brain cells. Number three, I want you to meditate for a bigger brain and greater focus. There are short-term impacts of meditation in that our bodies feel calmer. We can be more focused. Meditation is intense attention training. It's probably one of the best cognitive rehabilitation interventions that we have. And it also helps you build a bigger brain. So we're seeing a lot of really positive outcomes in meditation studies where meditators have like kind of thicker cortex and the hippocampus tends to plump up. Hippocampus will also plump up with physical activity. We're watching that grow as a result of being physically active and with meditation. And then also parts of the cortex that are related to empathy and understanding and connection are all kind of getting thicker as a result of meditation. And so meditate. The other thing to know is that the stress hormone cortisol is toxic to brain cells. It keeps you from growing new baby brain cells, and it can kill off the ones you've had your whole life. And so meditation allows you, the opportunity to put your body into that rest and digest, like we talked about. It sort of cuts off the pumping out of these stress hormones, and which can really save your brain. Number four is to sleep. And sleep can be really tough, especially when our routines are interrupted from a pandemic, from brain injury, from life, stress. But sleep is becoming increasingly more important, particularly as a means of preventing dementia down the line. That there may actually be a part of the sleep cycle where some of those plaques that cause Alzheimer's disease are actually flushed out of your brain when you're in deep sleep. When you don't get a good night's sleep, it can be really devastating to your attention, your decision-making abilities, your processing speed. We see increases in driving errors when people lose sleep. It can be as bad as being drunk in some cases. So sleep deprivation is really an issue, and it's really important to kind of maybe talk to your doctor about some ways that are kind of helpful for that. Another thing to kind of be aware of is that over-the-counter sleep medications, most of those like Tylenol PM, Unisom, those are antihistamines, and they're actually bad for your memory. They block the memory neurotransmitter that your hippocampus uses. It's called acetylcholine, and it can kind of get in the way of helping you form new memories. Other medications like benzodiazepines can also block memory formation. So it's important that you talk to your doctor and try to get as much help as you can, and maybe some non-medical interventions for sleep, or maybe some safer medical alternatives. Don't just assume that because it's an over-the-counter sleep medication that it's what's best for your brain. Melatonin doesn't seem to have the same impact, and it does seem to be the safest. It's a hormone supplement that seems relatively safe. But if you take it every night, it can start to wear off, and then you're kind of back at square one. So, okay, number 5, eat your veggies. So our brains need they need nutrients to function better. And we know that antioxidants and omega-3s that come from some nuts and flaxseed, walnuts, also fish, are really important for your overall brain health. And you cannot get these nutrients. You can get them, but they don't seem to be important for brain health if you take them in a supplement. By and large, supplements appear to be completely ineffective for brain health. So we really need to get these nutrients from our food. And these are, just kind of basic vitamins that you can get from, you don't have to go crazy, and, maybe you're into chia seeds and you need that, but you can get them from just kind of a nice colorful mix of fruits and vegetables, and throw in some walnuts and things like that. It is important that we mind our medications. And so I already mentioned about the over-the-counter sleep medications. There are medications that can boost your memory and attentiveness. And so maybe that's something you want to talk to your doctor about. There may be some of you who are on drugs like Provigil or Ritalin to kind of help with improved focus. That's not unusual after kind of a little bit longer after a brain injury. There are medications to improve memory formation, but these are only prescribed by your doctor, right? So there are other things that get in the way of our cognition. I mentioned a couple already, but also some psychiatric medications. Other medications can have side effects. And so it's really important that you just talk to your doctor about sort of this cost-benefit analysis, right? Like, I'm taking this medication because it's keeping me from having seizures, but is there anything that we can do to try to improve my cognition as a result, right? That could be finding an optimal dose, maybe trying a different version of that category of medication. So don't go walking in and saying, Dr. All told me to like change all my medications, but just work with your doctor, right? There are respectful ways to have these conversations that don't tend to make physicians defensive, but just see, I'm just really trying to have as best focus as I can, right? Okay, and last but not least is to socialize with purpose. So these are just kind of 2 different things that I threw into one chapter in the book, but socialization is so critical for our connection, for our overall health, and thereby our brain health. People who are more socially active they live longer, they have more resistance to Alzheimer's disease. And when we do that with a purpose, when we think about why am I here on this earth, and maybe asking some of those like deathbed questions that can be helpful, like what's the meaning of my life, and why do I live? My purpose is really, I had to actually write it out for myself, that it's to have fun, because sometimes I forget to do that, right? And so my purpose is to have fun and to live a long and healthy life, and making as big of a difference as I can, and giving back to the world, and that really helps drive me, and it can help motivate you and get you, doing some of those things that maybe you don't want to do so much, like being more physically active, and also just kind of being connected as much as we can, whether it's through Zoom, whatever's safest and most effective, and working that way. So I did want to give you that hug picture again, because so maybe you're having some feelings related to that, because it's so important that we connect as humans. And I'll take, if we have some time for a couple of questions, I can stick around, but that's what I've got for you. And happy to be with all of you today.